5 things I did that I believe helped to bring a marriage restoration about. Another question I get often is, what are the things you do differently now that you're back together? I'm going to be also talking about 5 things we do differently now that we're back together. Okay. First, 5 things that I started to do differently that I believe were instrumental in getting back together. Number one, I started to respect his space. This is what my darling spouse is saying. He doesn't want this anymore, and now he wants out. I started to respect what he was saying. Is it possible? Some truth in what he's saying? Is it possible what he's saying is not entirely out of place? Is it possible indeed that there are ways in which I could have contributed in bringing this about? Yeah, and once I started to think like that, my attitude changed. I began to first of all respect his space. If that is the case and he wants to be alone, he wants to be by himself, I left him. I think it was more so after I found one or two people I did were on the matter. So once I said they were on the matter, I just rested my case and just allowed it be. I cannot work on him. I cannot do anything. I can only work on me. This thing has taken the two of us. Yeah. One of the things I learned, for instance, is prayer. I hadn't been praying for him as much as I had come to learn that I ought to have been, especially since my husband was in ministry, for goodness sakes. So that comes to my number two. I began to pray. Apart from praying for our marriage restoration, now I began to pray for him. As a husband, I began to pray for him as an individual. I began to pray for him as a person. That's one thing that I began to do. Another thing I began to do was, I believe, was also instrumental is, okay, let me mention that when you let them be, and you're not chasing after them, if you continue to chase after them or you continue to, you know, seem to want to talk to them, they call, they want to talk to the children, they want to prolong the conversation. Or they send a message, you send another message back, because you want to get a message across to them, you want to say something to them, you want to, and what you're saying to them is not something to do with the children. If it's to do with the children, they want to hear. But you want to say something personal to them. I stopped doing all that. I stopped doing all that. I saw that, the more I did that, the more it upset him. And the more he's upset, the more he feels that the reason for all his pain is you, or all her pain is you. Why can't she leave me alone? Why can't she, So why can't he leave me alone? But when you let it be, they're able to, be alone, so they can reach them, by themselves without you. So they know that what they're doing is not coming from you, not in the least. Three, which I consider to be major, I spoke to a former person whom I consider to be a friend, and said to him, "What was the one that your wife did that helped you, helped to you to begin to change your mind?" And he said to me, "Oh, this time I'm so grateful to him. In this case, I'm so grateful to him for that nugget of wisdom, that nugget of insight." He said to me, each time I had cause to relate with her, each time I had cause to talk to her or to, have any form of engagement with her, I would come away with a feeling, with this fuzzy wuzzy, kind of feeling. And I understood what he meant. You will come away feeling all soft on the inside, all good. Imagine that when you're in that kind of situation, there's all kinds of negativity going on in your heart, all kinds of, the enemy wants to foul your heart. You see a spouse, there's all kinds of things you're dealing with, and it just so happens that each time you come close to this spouse of yours, you come away feeling fuzzy wuzzy in your spirit, in your heart, and that made him begin to think like, hey, what with me? And if the funny thing is that nobody else gave him that feeling. So and when he said that to me, I understood exactly what he was saying, and then I took it to work, my social media handles, so that if he ever came across any of my handles, he would, you know how you say something and the person you're speaking to knows, or this person you're speaking about knows you're speaking about them, you know, or the person you're speaking to knows you're speaking directly to them. But other people reading it will not may not understand that. Yeah, so I will say things, you know. And I remember on Father's Day, for instance, I still have those things on my Facebook handle. I would make posts, picking my heart, yeah, sharing exactly how my heart felt, what was in my heart, you know, things I wished I had the luxury, yeah, to speak, to say to my husband closer. You know, I said those things, I poured those things out. You know, I remember this was at a time when I had every reason to be bitter. I didn't choose the path of bitterness. I chose the path of a joyful spirit. You know, understanding that the level, the weight of bitterness that was awaiting me if I was to take the path of bitterness was too strong. It would crush me. So I couldn't handle that. So I let it go. And I quickly embraced joy, you know, and hope and love. You know, those I could work with, those I knew how to deal with because I was a child of God. Those were in my character. The others were not. So I I so I went to work with that. And then each time by chance he sent a message, you know, and then or he sent a message or he asked a question about the children or about the home front or something that he needed to know, you know, I would reply him and then I would say something curt, you know, short, brief, but sweet. Even when he was very angry, you know, I would still respond in the most gracious, sweetest manner. Not in a way that was stupid or in a way that had my tail between my legs. No, but in a way that spoke of strength and grace, yes, and dignity. Yet, you know, like when you understand that, hey, I'm fine, but you know, you're obviously not, you know, and are you okay? Kind of way, you know. In other words, you're not saying, hey, I'm not fine, and you made me not fine. Look at what you caused. No, they know they've left a lot of things um, so. So you don't need to rub it in. There's no point rubbing it in. It's not going to achieve anything for you. So instead, you show them that, hey, yes, you left things so, but the Lord has got us without saying, oh, we want you back. You know, make it evident that you want them back. That, you know, you're open to that negotiation. Yeah. So I make it easy for them to make a turnaround. Especially when you look around you and see a lot of people who have worked on and continue to work on. And there's no harm in making it obvious where you stand. That's one of the things I did. I changed. I made sure that my tone had become and that I forgave. Even I had come to that place of not holding any wrongs at all. You know, so that's one. And then number four, I actually honestly sat down one day, you know, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they said, we will not serve you. You know, if you say you will do those things to us, you know, we understand. We still will not serve you, you know, because we know that our God is able to save us. But even if he does not, know this, O King, that we still will not serve you. So I came to that place where I said to myself, just what if, let's even say that this, you know, it seemed like a question ringing in my head that just what if, you know, your marriage just doesn't happen? Does it mean that means that God doesn't work miracles, that God doesn't love you, your husband, that God doesn't love your home, you know, that God doesn't answer prayer? Is that what it would mean to you? And I sat down and thought about it. And I came to the place where I said, no, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that God loves you any less. I said, no, God doesn't love me any less. God doesn't love my husband any less. Doesn't love my children any less. If that is the case, my marriage restoration was not the only testament to God's love in my life. Will God still prove Himself in my life? Yes. I needed to be sure that, you know, I didn't want this thing for selfish reasons. You know, like, oh, I want my marriage restoration because that's the only way forward. Because that's the only way God can bless me. That's the only way I can know. It was as if God needed me to know that, you know, He would love me either way. He will still be there for me. He wanted me to deal with that. You don't make your marriage an idol. your idol or make your marriage your reason for living. Do you understand? So I came to that place. And it was a beautiful place to arrive at. I saw how much God loved me and how much his love for me wasn't encumbered by anything. And that helped me with seeking myself out with the Lord. Yeah, crafting the way forward in life with the Lord. So when it came to my pies, my physical, my intellectual, my emotional, and spiritual well-being, you continue to thrive in those, you know, under the watchful eye of the Father. So I learned to be happy in spite of my situation. That was another thing that I did. And I think the more I did that, the more beautiful I became, the more beautiful I was to my husband. He saw that, he could see that. That I was riding on something else that wasn't had nothing. I was riding on God. It wasn't about him anymore. That for me had become a question of whether or whether not God was God. God would remain God, over me. And he saw that, and I think he found that very admirable. The fact that, she could find her strength in God at a time when, her most beloved, was not there, and he found that admirable. He found that something he always hoped I could have, and here I was demonstrating that I had it. So, yeah, that was number four thing that changed for us. Number five, I would say, is I got to that place where I decided to simplify my life. I began to ask myself, honest to goodness, what are those things that are the most important to me? I began to build myself in the areas of the things that were the most important to me. I assure myself of what was most important to me. And then I learned that going forward, either way, whether or not we're coming back together, of course. I mean, that whether or not was not a constant ringing in my head. It was just something I had to deal with, for a season. I was still trusting God that it would happen, but I didn't know when. So, in the event of not knowing when, I came to that resolve that what was important to me was important to me. I wasn't in competition with anyone. My choices were mine. Everybody has right their own choices. I came to myself. Because I had time. I could be with the scriptures. I could be in prayer for hours on end. My husband wasn't home that I had to cook a meal for. My children would go, and I had the rest of how many hours to be, alone. As I was working on my pies, I was also affirming myself before the Lord. Lord, tell me who I am. Lord, tell me why I'm like this. Lord, tell me, explain to me, why this way, why not this other way? Why do I see things the way I do concerning me and me? And he showed me so many things. And of course, with that, I went to my husband about him. So I learned to work with him based on his personality. But I began to understand why he did some things that he did, or why he made certain choices. I began to come to terms with some of that. I see that this is just how he's wired, and began to see the beauty of his own person, and then I began to appreciate, who he was, where he was coming from. Fortunately for me, I also had access to my husband's old diaries, so I looked through those diaries and I began to see certain threads. I began to understand him the more. So what am I saying in essence? I gave myself to understanding him, the more. I gave myself to understanding myself the more, then understanding him the more, and then beginning to look at how we both operate and things that I could change, things I could do differently. Yeah, things that I would have done differently if I had known more, like my newfound understanding of himself and of myself. It was evident in the way I related with him. So he began to see a different me, a new me, like an offshoot from the person that I was originally. Because when you get married, children start to come so fast. Before you know it, in no time at all, the children take you over, and certain investments you are making in your relationship, in your intimacy as a husband and wife, your relationship as a husband and wife, yeah, certain investments, certain applications of yourself that you would have, be invested in. You find that you're no longer invested in them. You're now, busy manning one child after the other child after the other child. And sometimes it begins to tear away, into the fabric of your home. It may seem like, oh, the children are supposed to come and all of that. Let's not get all self-righteous about. Even today, I see some people who take it, who interpret that mother-child thing, differently, and they take it all, to another extreme, and it's eating into their own homes. And I see that what I learned is if you're able to consciously strike a balance, your spouse will see that you're consciously striking a balance. If you're not striking a balance, they may think that it's easy for them to think that, oh, she just wanted to marry me so she could have children. But the way I carried on, you would easily assume that, oh, that must have been all she wanted to just have children. Yeah. A lot of marriages are together, they're not apart, but they're not happy. They're not happy at all. The fact that the marriage is apart does not mean that they're happy. Yeah. So if you look into the dynamics of that home, you may just find people who are managing the situation and just sweeping the situation under the carpet, not speaking about the situation, but they're together, they're living in the same house. I am kind of glad that we didn't take that route because it would have just meant years and years of unhappiness, and not getting the best out of the marriage. Indeed, I tell you, not to say that separation is good or that divorce is good, but indeed, I tell you that what the enemy meant for evil, God does turn around, for good. So if you're able to see your situation as that, oh, this has been thrown at me, then God will be glorified in the situation, and you come at it with that attitude. God will come through for you. Actually, it seems as if it was a good thing that happened after all. When it was, yes. So when Jesus was crucified, was it a good thing? Not in the least. But in the end, for the glory that was set before him, does he mean that it was a good thing that happened to him? Not in the least. But God turned it around. And we are birthed from that experience. If that experience happened, we would have come. We would have come to be so. His children, God's children, we would have come into the fold of the household of grace. So, that's it for the 5 things that I did differently. I began to do differently that I believe were instrumental in us coming back together. Next, we go to 5 other things that we now do differently as a restored couple. So, coming next is 5 things we now do differently to stay strong as a restored couple. So, do please be on the lookout for it. God bless. Coming next is 5 things we now do differently as a restored couple, having learned much. Do be on the lookout for it. God bless.